What if a simple traffic stop exposed a broken system, and the woman in handcuffs held the power to change it all? If you're watching this for the first time, tell us where you're tuning in from. We'd love to know. And if stories of justice, resilience, and quiet power speak to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. We bring new stories like this every day. Now, let's follow what really happened to Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley. Danielle Hartley didn't flinch when a flash of blue light flared in the rearview mirror. She sat still in her matte black Jeep Grand Cherokee, engine idling softly, her right hand resting on the screen of a military-grade GPS mounted on the dashboard. The device cast a dim blue glow onto her cheek. She wasn't lost, just navigating the back roads around Allen Creek, which had changed more than she expected after over a decade of construction. Even though she'd been deployed to this base dozens of times and had commanded operations across 3 continents, she had to admit, no map ever keeps up with time, and no rank is high enough to stop the land from changing beneath your feet. Behind her, a burst of red and blue lights erupted in the mirror, slicing through the peaceful evening like a blade into silence. Danielle looked up. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. Just a sigh, heavy and tired, the kind of sigh Black people in America learn to carry when history taps them gently on the shoulder and reminds them, it's not over. She rolled the window down, hands where I could see them. The voice was sharp, unnecessarily loud, carrying the familiar edge of provocation despite no sign of threat. Officer Brian Calloway, early 40s, slight belly, eyes weighted with prejudice, approached the vehicle, one hand resting near his holstered gun. Danielle had already placed her hands on the wheel, positioned precisely at 10 and 2. Her fingers, long, clean, nails trimmed short, tapped lightly in rhythm, a small exercise she learned in boot camp to steady her pulse under pressure. License and registration. Calloway barked the order. No greeting, no introduction, no procedure. Danielle answered with a familiar, steady line. I'm reaching for them now, officer. No reply, just his eyes, fixed on her, like he was waiting for the slightest wrong move to justify his unfounded vigilance. She slowly opened the glove compartment and pulled out 2 neatly folded documents. She didn't look at him, only her own hands, because she had known for a very long time, that not everything she carried on her shoulders could shield her from that look. She held the papers out. Registration is valid. I pulled over to adjust my GPS. I haven't broken any laws. Calloway didn't even glance at the documents. He took a step back, hand still near his gun. Step out of the vehicle. Now, Danielle turned her head, slowly. I'm not under arrest. Calloway didn't answer. Across the street, a gray Toyota Camry pulled to a stop. A man inside raised his phone to record. A few cars down, someone shouted. She didn't do anything wrong. Danielle heard it all, but she didn't turn her head, because the truth in this world didn't carry weight anymore unless it came with video footage. Are you carrying a weapon? Sergeant Brian Calloway's voice cut through, not as a question, but as an accusation. Danielle slowly turned, raising both arms slightly, palms facing outward. No, officer. I'm an active duty service member. My personal weapon is stored in the armory on base. Calloway squinted. Oh, so now you're military? His tone dripped with sarcasm, unapologetically. Were you then? A mechanic? A nurse? One of those priority hires they brought in for diversity? He sneered. Danielle said nothing. Not because she didn't have a response, but because she knew everything she said could and would be twisted. Even if it was true. Another car slowed on the opposite side. A woman in a white Honda CR-V raised her phone and zoomed in on them. Why are you arresting her? She didn't do anything wrong. Someone yelled from a window. A man's voice joined in. I'm filming all of this. Calloway flicked a glance across the street, then turned back. Hands behind your back. You're not going anywhere. I'd like to make a phone call, Danielle said, her tone still steady. This has gone beyond a routine stop. Oh, you'll make a call, Calloway muttered. But not right now. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, twisted her around, and wrenched it behind her back. The sound of steel cuffs snapped through the midday sun, cold and heavy. like a false verdict stamped with authority. Danielle didn't resist. She didn't cry. One of Calloway's knees pressed against her lower back, pinning her against the hood of the vehicle. The heat of the metal burned through the fabric of her sand-colored shirt. "You're being arrested for failure to comply." The charge was paper-thin, but delivered with the certainty of divine law. In the rearview mirror, she could see her phone still resting in the cup holder just beneath the steering wheel. The screen had just flashed with a new message, but it was too far to reach. She lifted her head. She couldn't turn to see the people behind her, but she could hear them. Voices growing louder, a crowd beginning to form. Someone called out her name. Not her rank, but her name. Danielle, as if they had just realized something crucial, but far too late to stop what was happening. Even while pinned against the car, cuffs tied around her wrists, dust clinging to her boots, Danielle never lost what mattered most. Stillness. Not resignation, but deliberate control. The kind honed by those who've learned to keep their heads cool in the face of a loaded weapon, or an entire system that never saw them clearly to begin with. "You're making a serious mistake, officer." Her voice was quiet, not threatening, but sharp as ground steel. Calloway let out a laugh. "All right, you gonna call your boss to come discipline me?" Danielle didn't respond. She didn't have to, because one more call, and Jefferson Parkway would become a chessboard. And as always, she'd be the one moving the next piece. "You're making a serious mistake, officer." The words of Danielle Hartley still echoed as Captain Marcus Reed, in full camouflage uniform, stepped out from the gray Toyota Camry across the street. Phone still recording, military ID gripped in his other hand. His face was stone, not out of coldness, but because he recognized the moment. All too well. The posture, the presence, the silence. He'd seen it before, at military inspections, in war rooms, and in the eyes of commanding officers. But he hadn't expected to see it here, on the side of a road in Allen Creek, under a cloudless sky, next to a car pulled over for no valid reason. "You're military?" Calloway growled, still gripping Danielle's wrist, clinging to the last thread of fragile authority. Danielle tilted her head slightly, her voice loud enough to carry across the median strip, reaching every bystander who was still filming, still watching. "Would someone please contact Fort Langley Operations Command and inform them that Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley is being unlawfully detained on Jefferson Parkway. Exit 17B." Silence. Total silence. And then, the sound of a phone hitting the pavement. Marcus blinked, reaching down to pick up the phone that had just slipped from his hand. His mouth hung, slightly open, unable to believe what he'd just heard. Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley. Not someone vaguely familiar. Not, she looks kind of official. But the woman who had once coordinated NATO deployments, directed operations in Syria, honored at the Pentagon, now handcuffed under the sun like an unnamed suspect. He stepped into the road, pulling out his military ID and badge from inside his shirt, raising them high above his head. "Officer Calloway." His voice rang out, loud, commanding. "I'm Captain Marcus Reed, United States Army. I demand you cease this arrest immediately. She is my direct commanding officer, and the superior of anyone currently listening on this police frequency." Calloway turned, frozen. "You're what?" Marcus repeated, slower this time, each word crashing into the silence like a hammer. "Captain Marcus Reed, and the woman you've just handcuffed is Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley." The crowd stirred. Murmurs rose. A woman gasped. "I know that name. She led the relief efforts during Hurricane Katrina." "She spoke at the National Defense Summit," another voice shouted. Calloway looked down at Danielle, then at Marcus, then at the dozens of phones recording him from every angle. He stammered, No one told me. No one made it clear." Danielle now stood fully upright, the cuffs still tied around her wrists, but her spine was rigid, like a drawn blade. She looked Calloway directly in the eyes for the first time. No rage, no spite, just the gaze of someone who had stared down missile strikes more terrifying than this, and remained standing. "You didn't ask," she said, and right then, the low thunder of helicopter blades rolled in from the south end of Jefferson Parkway. The sound was deep, steady, unmistakable. The kind of sound anyone who's ever worn a uniform would instantly recognize. Military rotor wash stirred up dust along the roadside, forcing tree branches to bow in submission. Sergeant Brian Calloway turned his eyes skyward, frowning as he spotted the gray UH-72 Lakota helicopter hovering about 50 feet off the ground. No police markings, holding its position with exact military precision. At that same moment, a line of black, government-plated SUVs turned the corner behind them. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the heavy silence of people who don't need to shout to command obedience. The lead SUV pulled up to the curb. The passenger door opened before the tires had even stopped rolling. Out stepped a woman in a deep navy blue suit, silver hair pinned in a tight bun, moving with the decisive pace of someone who'd spent a lifetime issuing orders. Colonel Regina Monroe. She didn't need an introduction. One glance from her was enough to make everyone within range stand at least half an inch straighter. Calloway instinctively stepped back, his mouth fumbling. Who is in charge here? Monroe asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like cold metal. Marcus Reed raised his hand. Colonel, the incident is being filmed from multiple angles. Lieutenant General Hartley has been unlawfully detained. Remove the cuffs, Monroe ordered, without hesitation. Calloway didn't move. Then, his hand drifted toward the retention strap on his sidearm. Not drawing, but just enough that a single breath out of rhythm could tip the entire moment over the edge. Marcus tensed. Monroe lifted her chin. The crowd held its breath. Danielle, still standing steady, spoke, low and clear. I suggest you don't do that. Not for my sake, but for yours. 1 second. 2. Calloway withdrew his hand. Not from the holster, but from the illusion that he still had control. Monroe stepped forward, pulled a key from her breast pocket, and unlocked the cuffs from Danielle's wrists. 3 seconds, but it landed like a public sentence. Are you all right? Monroe asked. Still upright. Still breathing evenly, Danielle replied. Monroe turned to Calloway. You handcuffed a lieutenant general in the U.S. Army without verifying her ID, without probable cause, and without a warrant. Are you aware of the federal and disciplinary consequences of that? Calloway stammered. She didn't give me her information right away. She didn't. You didn't ask. Monroe cut him off, repeating Danielle's exact words. And you reached for your weapon, in front of multiple witnesses, when you were asked for an explanation. That act will be noted in the incident report. Cameras were still rolling. People were still watching. Calloway lowered his head, and for the first time in his life, he truly felt what it meant to be observed. Not the one behind power, but the one being held to it. Danielle adjusted her wrist, the red marks still fresh. But her eyes weren't on Calloway anymore. They were on the helicopter, still hovering in the distance. A silent reminder that from this moment forward, every step she took would no longer be just personal. It would echo. The Internal Affairs hearing room at the Allen Creek Police Department was always cold. Not because of the temperature, but because of the atmosphere. An air of reckoning that left no room for denial. Sergeant Brian Calloway had been brought in for investigation. He sat rigid in a metal chair, his hands tightly clasped in front of him, as if holding back a rising wave of dread. Across the table sat Deputy Inspector Lawrence Whitman, a man who had seen 3 police chiefs come and go, and still hadn't opened the file, resting silently between them. He just watched, long enough to make anyone squirm. Do you know who Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley is? Whitman finally spoke, his voice low but crisp, like a warning shot fired into the air. Calloway swallowed hard. I do now. No. Whitman shook his head, leaning forward. I'm not asking about now. I'm asking, at the moment you pinned her hands to the hood of her Jeep and snapped those cuffs on, did you know who she was? Calloway swallowed again. No. She said she was adjusting her GPS. She didn't present ID immediately. Did she resist? No. Did she threaten you? No. Did she refuse to provide documentation? No. But her attitude... Stop. Whitman raised a hand, soft but cutting. You think attitude is grounds to unclip your holster? We don't arrest people because they make us uncomfortable, Officer Calloway. We are not authorized to handcuff a federally decorated lieutenant general because you felt uneasy. Calloway bit his lip. I've seen impersonators before. I was just trying to. You assumed. You speculated. You ignored valid documentation. You handcuffed a woman who outranks the governor of this state. In broad daylight. In front of dozens of witnesses. And you reached for your gun when confronted with the truth. Whitman opened the folder. Inside were drone stills, social media videos, a medical report documenting bruising on Danielle's wrists, and a formal letter of protest from the Pentagon. Calloway had nothing left to say. He looked down at the floor, and, maybe for the first time in his career, he understood. The badge didn't shield him from accountability. It bound him to it. Whitman exhaled slowly. We've received over 600 emails from the Department of Defense, from national media outlets, from veterans, some who live in this town, saying they're ashamed of how you acted. One of them served with General Hartley's father. He wrote, "The daughter of a hero was treated like a criminal, right in her own hometown." Calloway leaned forward, voice faint. "I didn't do it because she's black." Whitman paused, then looked up, his gaze slicing through the uniform like it was tissue. "But she is black, Officer Calloway, and you did do it. The question is, the rest of this country gets to decide whether that was the reason. And I'll tell you now, they're leaning toward yes." The room fell silent. Only the ceiling fan could be heard, spinning slowly overhead, like time had shifted into a new kind of rhythm. A rhythm that wasn't waiting for him anymore. After the incident on Jefferson Parkway, Danielle Hartley stopped by her brother's place. The third-floor apartment belonging to Jordan Hartley, nestled in Allen Creek's historic district, was usually bathed in afternoon light, its west-facing windows catching the golden wash of sunset spilling across the distant rows of red-tiled roofs. But tonight, though the light was just as rich, the room felt colder than usual. Danielle sat on the leather couch, one leg crossed over the other, eyes fixed on her phone screen. The clip, her in handcuffs, the roar of the helicopter, Brian Calloway's face, and her own, calm, unshaken, was playing over and over again across every social media platform. Jordan stepped out from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "One for you, and one for the national outrage," he said. He wore a deep blue shirt, tie loosened, thin glasses resting lightly on his nose. It had been a while since Danielle had seen her brother look this much like both a lawyer and the little brother who always knew when something was wrong. Danielle took the mug and sipped. "Do you think if I stay quiet, this whole thing will blow over?" Jordan sat down, placing his mug on the coffee table. "Definitely, but not because justice would have been served, because the system is very good at swallowing things in silence." She let out a long breath. "I don't want to become the headline. I don't want to be a symbol. I'm a soldier, not a spokesperson." Jordan tilted his head. "You're a soldier, which is exactly why you have to speak. People like you don't get arrested by mistake. You got arrested because they didn't think you could be someone more. And if someone like you, with rank, a record, and a reputation, can be treated like that, what happens to those without the uniform, without the cameras?" Danielle said nothing. Inside her, the data grids from hundreds of missions she had once commanded felt suddenly useless. She could orchestrate an airstrike, negotiate with foreign defense ministers, command a regiment in the desert. But there was no field manual for navigating a media firestorm when you're the center of it. Federal press outlets are waiting for a statement, Jordan reminded her. "And if I don't give one?" Danielle asked. Jordan leaned back, lips pressed in thought, then said softly, "Then someone else will write the story for you. And trust me, they'll get it wrong." A soft chime sounded. Danielle's phone lit up with a message from Colonel Regina Monroe, requesting clearance through the Pentagon to prepare a press conference. "The decision is yours. But if you choose to stand, we will stand with you." Danielle set the phone down on the table, then looked up. Her eyes were no longer the same. "Call them. Schedule the press. Cancel all no-interview rules." Jordan smiled faintly. "So you're ready?" Danielle took another sip of tea and offered a slow, quiet smile. "No, but I'm done being quiet. It's time they listen." At the National Civic Hall in Washington, D.C., The entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath as Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley stepped onto the stage. No fanfare, no marching band, no honor guard, just her, in full dress uniform, chest adorned with medals, shoulders not tensed, but still heavy from years of combat, and the weight of expectation pressing in from all sides today. National media aired it live. Nearly 40 radio networks, dozens of television channels, and every major social media platform were streaming in real time. In the audience sat military leaders, civilian officials, journalists, veterans, high school students, and people who never thought they'd find themselves in a room like this. But today, they were here. Danielle approached the podium. No script, no teleprompter, no need. My name is Danielle Hartley. I am a daughter, a sister, a commanding officer, and I have served this country for over 26 years. Her voice rang clear. She didn't need amplification. I have led troops across the burning sands of Syria, over the snowy hills of Eastern Europe. I've negotiated in NATO war rooms and crossed trenches under fire to pull a wounded soldier to safety. But last week, I stood on the side of a highway in Allen Creek, my hands cuffed to the hood of my car, because one officer looked at the color of my skin and decided I couldn't possibly be anyone. The room went silent. No whispers, no pages turning, only the deepening breath of people unaccustomed to hearing truth spoken at full volume. Danielle lowered her gaze briefly, then looked back up. I'm not here to shame a man. I'm here to expose a system, one where a black woman can hold the rank of lieutenant general and still be seen as a threat before she is seen as a human being. Just then, a reporter in the third row stood abruptly. A white woman, microphone in hand. She didn't wait for the Q&A. General Hartley, aren't you turning a personal incident into an unnecessary political statement? Perhaps it was just a misunderstanding. Danielle paused. She didn't frown. She simply looked straight at the woman, her voice steady, unwavering. You call being handcuffed on the side of the road, after providing valid identification, a asterisk misunderstanding? Then what do you call it? When someone doesn't have a rank, or a camera phone, or a comrade who arrives in time, do we call them a statistic? Silence fell again. No one had an answer. No one dared. Danielle returned to her speech without missing a breath. I'm not asking for justice. I expect it, not just for me, but for the ones who will never stand behind a podium like this. If justice must be begged for, then it's no longer justice. I've given orders to hundreds of soldiers heading into dangerous territory, but never in my life did I think I'd have to give an order to myself, not to step onto a sidewalk in my own hometown. She paused, long enough for someone in the room to realize. They were holding tears in their chest like a stone slab. I've spent my life protecting a country that sometimes forgets to protect the people who've lived for it. Today, I'm simply reminding it of the promise it once made. When Danielle stepped back from the podium, there was no thunderous applause. Not at first, just the sound of people standing, one by one. No chants, no theatrics, just respect, deeper than sound. Backstage, Colonel Regina Monroe gave a subtle nod. That speech just made an entire country stop talking and start listening. 3 days after the press conference, the Allen Creek Post Office received a sealed envelope, overnight from the Department of Homeland Security. Inside was a single-page document. Not long, just 3 sentences. No apology, no excuse. Just this. Following internal review and federal directive, effective immediately, Sergeant Brian Calloway is hereby terminated from the Allen Creek Police Department. All rights and official law enforcement representation are permanently revoked. When Calloway received the letter, he was sitting alone in his one-bedroom apartment, the TV playing quietly in the background. A news replay of himself, frozen-faced, hand on the wrong spot, cuffing a lieutenant general on national television. He reached for the remote, but didn't move. At the Allen Creek Police Headquarters, a printed copy of the termination letter was posted in the break room, right beside a new memo from the Department of Justice. All current and incoming personnel must complete mandatory training under the newly established Hartley Protocols, A young officer reading the notice furrowed his brow. What's this supposed to be? A seasoned officer shrugged, half grinning. It's the thing that helps you recognize a 3-star general before you cuff them on the side of the highway. At Capitol Hill, the Federal Law Enforcement Reform Act passed with one of the highest bipartisan margins in modern history, 92-8. The bill included mandatory bias assessment training for all federally funded law enforcement officers, real-time military identity verification systems linked to national personnel databases, required retraining in nonviolent citizen engagement, especially with unarmed civilians. A senator from North Carolina stood before cameras and declared, "We can't wait until there's a video. We have to act before people need to record to survive." Callaway had no cameras pointing at him anymore. No lights, no podium, just a paper in his hand, in a quiet room where every excuse had already expired. Out there, people were no longer asking, "Who is she?" Now, they asked each other, "Why was that ever considered normal?" 2 weeks after the national press conference, Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley stepped into a small classroom at Roosevelt Public High School in southeast Washington, D.C. It wasn't an invitation from a journalist. It wasn't arranged by any senator. It was because Lenora Jennings, a literature teacher who'd taught there for over 12 years, sent Danielle a single email. Subject line, "We don't need a speech. We just need you to be here." Danielle said yes immediately. In that small classroom, nearly 30 students of all races, all backgrounds, all expressions, sat in a circle around a woman who had once stood before NATO, had once been cuffed on a roadside, and now was sitting on an orange plastic chair. No podium, no script, just a story. A boy in a hoodie, leaning back in his chair, asked softly, "Were you scared?" when he pulled the cuffs out and slammed you on the car. Danielle paused, then nodded. "Yes, I've been in places where rockets flew overhead. But fear is realizing you're in your own country and still have to prove you deserve to exist as a human being." A girl with braided pigtails raised her hand. "But you could have shouted, 'You have rank. Why didn't you fight back?'" Danielle smiled. Not because the question was naive, but because it was honest. Because power doesn't live in the loudest voice. It lives in knowing when to speak and who you're speaking for. If I had shouted for myself, maybe no one would have listened. But if I stayed silent at the right moment, then the whole country might hear when I finally spoke. A younger student in the front row, maybe 8th grade, asked firmly, "Do you think this will change everything?" Danielle looked at him. His face wasn't skeptical. It was hopeful, and she couldn't bring herself to crush that. "No," she said gently. "It won't change everything, but it's the start of changing how we endure. And once you know you deserve more, you'll never settle for less again." The class stood up. No one told them to. No one led. They just stood, because sometimes standing is the loudest applause. That evening, as the sunset washed golden across the quiet streets of Allen Creek, Lieutenant General Danielle Hartley walked barefoot across her hardwood floor. A small oak box, sealed with the insignia of the Department of Defense, cradled in one hand. She didn't rush to open it. She let it sit on the table beside an old photo frame. A picture of her in her very first uniform, standing beside her father, Vietnam War veteran Sergeant Edward Hartley, his eyes still holding that quiet pride she had carried with her all her life. She opened the box. Inside was a perfectly folded flag, a handwritten letter from the Secretary of Defense, and a silver pin engraved with her name. No title, no rank, just one line: "For fighting in silence and winning with truth." Danielle lifted the flag, pressed it gently to her chest. Then she placed it on the wooden mantel above her fireplace, right beside the photo of her father, Sergeant Edward Hartley, Vietnam veteran, as if 2 generations, 2 battlefields, could now rest side by side in peace. Outside on the porch, a breeze carried the scent of grass after rain, and the distant laughter of children riding bikes. Small sounds, but to her, they were the sound of a homeland that had finally begun to listen, not with applause, but with changes in how people looked at each other. In the absence of suspicion, when a black woman wore a uniform, and in the new lessons taught to the next generation. That dignity does not ask for permission, and silence is no longer the safest choice. Danielle leaned against the window frame, looking out onto the street. This battle required no bullets, no field maps, only resolve, and the quiet endurance of those brave enough to stand still until the system is forced to move. She pulled out her phone, playing back the clip from the classroom that morning. The boy's face, the one who had asked, "Were you scared?" was still there. Danielle smiled softly. "Yes," she whispered, "but I moved forward anyway." And that's how she knew the battle wasn't over. But this time, she wasn't fighting it alone.